Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted, the live call-in show that happens every single week, 7 p.m. Central Time, right here at the Atheist Community of Austin. This is a show where we talk about what people believe and why. Every single week, I bring on a special guest, and this week's guest is Ian Jaydid. Ian, welcome to Truth Wanted.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so Ian,
Yes,
you are an interesting person because I typically have a lot of people who do video content or they're speakers in some way, but you just kind of do a little bit of everything. So
I've been doing everything.
Yeah, what do you do? Can you I think you're a better person to talk about it than me.
Sure. So I'd say first and foremost, I've been an artist forever. Since I was a little kid, I've been painting and doing cartoons. So that's like that's my first thing, and it's always probably going to be my last thing that I'm always going to come back to. I love art, so I'm an artist, right? So, and then I got into these experiences that we're going to be talking about, and this went on for years and years and years. I mean, it still goes on to this day, but they've transformed a bit, and I've been able to find a way to meld some of these experiences into my daily life, so I can kind of keep my head on straight and keep some sanity. And then I started writing because I thought, the stuff that I've picked up, I feel that this would be great mixed into some sort of crazy story. So I started toying around with this sci-fi occult adventure story years ago. And then one of my degrees is in English. So I've got some writing background. And then, I started getting into writing. And then I finally, after years and years, I completed a full novel, which is called Tripping the Field, which is out now. That I'm sure we'll have links to that and whatnot. I actually have apparently there's some fairly large movie producer looking at it right now.
Cool.
May actually be able to work this in, I'd love to see it as a series. I don't know if you could condense it into a 2-hour film. It's an epic book. It's like almost 500 pages long, and it is, I don't even know how you'd condense it into like a 2-hour film kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So then I had the art, and then I had the writing, and I've always been a movie fanatic. So I started kind of getting into video a little bit here and there. And after I kicked out Tripping the Field, I started doing, these podcasts and radio shows. And then I thought after a while, I said, I'd like to start just kind of creating my own content. Well, I had another book to write first. Then I created a nonfiction book. I'm like, I should create something that's a little bit more grounded, that more just lays out where I'm coming from, my background, my philosophy, something where I'm talking more directly to the audience, and it's not done through some crazy, wacky hero's journey that's filled with science fiction and whatnot. So that's my latest book. I just kicked that out just a few weeks ago, and that is called Migration, and that is on the surface, it's a study of media, because I'm a media fanatic. I've always been fascinated with film and music and special effects. I love watching special effects artists. Again, I've got that art background, so I'm that guy who watches movies, and I'm always analyzing what could they have done better with the writing? What could they have done better with how they laid out that special effect? Yada yada yada. So in many ways, I take my philosophy in my last book, Migration, and I explain it through media, which I'll explain it as we go. And now my main thing is, now I've got these 2 books out, and I'm kind of comfortable with where I kicked out a couple of books. I did a fiction and a nonfiction, and now I'm just focusing on these videos. I've been starting to create my own 20-minute videos where I just kind of take a part of Migration from the book, a section of it, and I'm like, all right, how can I now adapt this to video? Because I'm trying to use the video format to my advantage, and I'm trying to say, all right, how can I maybe use this and explain my concept in a way that I couldn't really do in just words alone? How can I really try to visually show you what I'm talking about? Because all of these topics we're going to get into are so abstract, and there's no one way to really get my idea across. So I have to, it's a lot of metaphor. I have to come at you through video and through text and everything. So
sure.
So I do everything. I do it.
Yeah.
I do it all.
And one reason that in particular that we were really interested in talking to you was your ideas on lucid dreaming,
Yeah.
because you do talk a little bit about this idea of, well, I mean, the lucid dreaming along with kind of the astral plane, doing astral projection and stuff.
Yes.
Which is, when we talk about it on this show, we're usually talking about folks who are kind of in the new age sphere, who are kind of, you know, in the world. But you
Sure.
identify as an atheist.
100%.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
always have, kind of. In a way, I'd say I'd always have, but I never really thought about it.
Yeah.
I grew up in a household where I was not really ever told what to think on one level or another. I did not, you know, we went to church, sort of. We went to, I think my parents took us to it was like a unity church, you know, for every once in a while, which is pretty open-minded, pretty liberal. You know, they're the guys that burn question marks in your front yard. There's always sort of like, hey, whatever you want to believe, you're all good.
Yeah.
So there was never really any dogma that I was ever subjected to. And the same thing from both my mom and dad. My father's a yoga teacher now, but originally when I was growing up, he was a mechanical engineer for a steel company outside of Chicago. So he was a real logical kind of a person, you know, part A fits into part B sort of thing. So I learned my logic and my rationalization from him. And then I would kind of say that my mother is on the other side of the spectrum, a little bit more of just the heartfelt kind of hippie mentality who loves music and, you know, poetry. And so I kind of had both of those worlds to bounce off of. So when these things started happening to me, I was about 19. I just got out of high school, maybe for just a few months, and I went into, so you have to understand, I'm 48, so this was quite a while ago. The reason I mentioned that is because at the time the internet wasn't really a thing, and so I didn't know what had happened, and I couldn't just run to Google and go, well, what the heck, what really happened? I was kind of left to just kind of trying to figure out from bookstores and whatnot, like what kind of matches my experience. And my experience was that I went into the best thing I can describe, a visionary state that was more realistic than anything I'd ever experienced in my waking life. Super intense. I found myself in a forest specifically. The story of what happened is not as important as these other details I'm going to describe to you. But I found myself in a forest. I could feel the wind on my face. I could feel the sun on my face. I could smell the air, the whole thing. And what was odd is that I was 100% aware that I was in a dream state. I had no illusion whatsoever. There was no story going on for me in this vision. And it was really intense. And as I progressed through this vision, I just kind of was walking around like, well, let's see where I am. And I kind of wandered around, and at the end of this vision, I ended up having what they would generally call a traditional astral projection. And I'm not a big fan of that word, but basically I
want you to explain that, because we talk about that, but I don't know if I even fully understand what people mean when they say that. So I'm curious to hear like your explanation.
Sure. So when I say that, I'm saying that you could say that my consciousness left my body. Now, I don't actually believe that that's actually what's happening.
Sure.
But what I started to be able to do, these visionary states continued. Once I had the first one, they continued every night, sometimes in the morning. And this went on for years and years, where I would go into these states for sometimes hours on end, where I was fully aware of I was fully aware I was dreaming, but yet I was still kind of in these dream realms. I'd find myself in these scenarios with people in strange places and whatnot. And what I started finding after a while is that I found that I could kind of control these visions on some point. And I started to go, well, let's see if I can go find people that I know. And I'd started to go find friends and family to see where they were at. And then I would be able to, so I'd come back, I'd wake up in the morning with, this information about supposedly where what my mom was doing, what my girlfriend was doing, what, so-and-so was doing. And I've always been a very pragmatic sort of person. I started making phone calls after a while and going, hey, Mom, I need you to tell me exactly, blow by blow, what were you doing at 7:30 in the morning. I saw the entire vision of where she was. I saw her drop that pan when she was making eggs in the morning. I saw what she was wearing. And she was 300 miles away from me at the time. And as these stories started coming back to me, to my horror at first, they were again and again and again exactly the way I saw it. And that was I'm sure that sounds really exciting to a lot of people. When I had that proven to me that, okay, there's something more to this lucid dreaming, there's some other connection. Somehow I'm able to jump out of, I can move my consciousness beyond the physical body, whatever that means. So, when I first started getting into this, I was subjected to a lot of spiritual traditions. I mean, everybody had their narrative, right? Everybody had their story. This is what happened from a Buddhist perspective. This is what happened from a shamanic perspective. And for years, I devoured all of it. I mean, I devoured everything I possibly get my hands on, and I considered everything else too. Like, hey, what's actually going on here? Perhaps am I having some brain anomaly? Maybe I should maybe I should have an MRI. I mean, I don't really know what's going on. But when it started to get to the point where I was coming back with this information that was accurate from other places that were beyond my realm, beyond my scope, I had to start accepting, okay, so what does that mean? That means that my consciousness under certain conditions can somehow move and get information. I think that's the best way I can describe it. It can get information from other areas of my world, it seems like. So I started to develop a theory behind all of this, the mechanics behind it, so to speak. And that is where I'm at now. As I'm speaking to people now, I'm at a place where I've developed the mechanics behind this process. And I would say that I feel that I understand at least the mechanism in my own way. And I try to describe it now to other people in a way that is free from spiritual lingo. It's free from religious lingo. I don't want to add another narrative onto this. I'm like the mechanic who's just going, look, this is what a way I see it happening.
Let me ask you real quick, because you can still do this.
Yes.
Right. And so, like, I know lucid dreaming is definitely a thing.
Absolutely.
I've had a lucid dream myself. I had one like on accident. I remember it very clearly. When it happened, I was on a backpacking trip in New Mexico, and I was totally exhausted. And I remember the things happening to me that people who lucid dream talk about, where they kind of see flashes of light and stuff before they kind of dream and stuff. Like I kind of had that experience, and that was a one-time thing. And I've read about people who can control their lucid dreams.
Yes.
And I
that's what I had to do first.
Yeah. So there's like these techniques of like writing down your dream when you wake up and stuff like that, different stuff. I don't know the specifics of it, but this is definitely a phenomenon I've heard. And then there's this one step further thing that you're talking about, which is your consciousness moving geographically to different locations in the real world. Now, here's what you should have done, Ian. You should have figured out what I was doing yesterday when you went to sleep, and then you could have told me on the show, and then I would be impressed. I would have been impressed. I'm not gonna lie.
So here's the thing, and we can go into the mechanics behind that. And the problem is that for me to bring in an intention of what it is that I actually want to do, what I want to see, where I want to go, it's not easy. It is not easy to do that, because when you go into this state, you have to drop. Essentially, what you're doing is you're dropping your ego, so to speak. You're dropping your identity. And I found out later that that's what is important. And when you do that, you have to give up a lot of your reasonings for doing things. You have to give up your desires, your intentions, if that makes sense. So it's like there's a price to pay, at least in my case. And I would say that in most people's cases, there's some price to pay to go into this state. You have to drop all of your, if I have some desire to prove something to someone, that's not necessarily going to carry over into this state, and it's tough. And so in most of my lucid dreams, they come to me spontaneously. Now I know there's lots and lots of people who have all these lots of different techniques to induce a lucid dream. These have always just started happening to me. So
I'm curious because, obviously dreaming is is the most subjective experience like possible, pretty much, right? Like, and maybe drug trips, right? So it's like, that's the one thing where it's like, it's super hard to demonstrate exactly what's going on. It's the same thing where people have the near-death experiences and stuff too, right? It's like the one thing that you can't really verify. But if you have information about what people are doing at specific times,
right,
that seems like something that you could demonstrate and verify to be true. Do you when you do the presentations and stuff, do you provide any evidence of that? Have you been like audited by anybody else? Like,
no,
James Randi's been interested in having somebody like this,
Absolutely. And I was approached after a few shows from somebody who apparently they claimed that they used to work for some division of the CIA. I have no idea whether or not they were being serious or not. And all I can tell you is that I've proven it to myself so many times over the years. And at this point, my understanding is that I'm a good candidate for what they refer to as remote viewing, where you do this. It's kind of like you kind of go into a little bit of a meditative state while you're fully awake. That is another area that I've personally, I don't have a real passion for that. I'm not super interested in going into that. I'm kind of selfish on some level, where I want to just use what I've learned, and I'm using it for my own development. I'm using this to, like, what can I do with this in my daily life? Because there are crossovers. The things that I've been learning about what is true for my consciousness in a lucid state is the same that is true for every other state, is what I'm finding. A psychedelic state, a complete waking state, whatever. But what I have found, the reason I was able to do this to begin with is that, so I am on what they would generally refer to as the higher end of the spectrum of autism. And in my case, it's a huge spectrum that can mean millions of things. In my case, what that generally means is that my relationship with my own narrative, with my own identity, with my own internal dialogue, when you get down to the core of it, my relationship with my internal thinking is a very loose relationship. I had a hard time actually adapting to internal talk when I was younger. I struggled with it for a long time to really think of like how I'm thinking to myself, how I'm sounding to other people. And I know that's common with other autistic people, but I found out that was actually my golden ticket, that I had this distance on some level from, it's like there's my consciousness, my awareness, whatever that is. And we can talk about what I think that might be. I don't know what consciousness is.
That's want to be my next question.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that. Absolutely.
I want to, because I want to get the calls here in just a second too.
Yeah.
Before we get the calls, like this is what is most pressing in my mind, because I'm an atheist and I'm virtually a naturalist. I don't have any beliefs outside of what's physical. I don't have any supernatural beliefs. I don't have any paranormal beliefs. I don't have anything outside of what's observable of humans. I'm going to be skeptical of the claims. And consciousness is one of those things where it's really tricky, but at the same time, I've never observed consciousness outside of a physical being. I've never seen consciousness happen without a brain being present, in other words. So like, with that understanding in mind, is an explanation of what you're talking about going to be appealing to me in any sense, or am I going to have to adopt another kind of belief or belief structure in order to, get what you're putting down?
When I call myself an atheist, let me perhaps I can explain that first. Sure. I would say that I have no belief in the supernatural, period. I don't even know what that even means, what the supernatural even means. In fact, I would say that whatever it is that I'm experiencing and whatever consciousness actually is, I do believe 100% will eventually be some understanding of this. I believe that we're going to get to the bottom of it, whether it's through neurology or physics or whatever the case may be. What I am suggesting, what I'm trying to offer on these, with my talking, with my books and everything, is I'm trying to say, okay, if we're going to really get to the bottom of what consciousness is, all I can tell you is that it is something that is not bound to the physical body. It is something that is attracted to narratives, though. It is something that is somehow attracted to, we have a, I don't know how to explain it. we're storytelling creatures by nature. We love our stories. We love our narratives. We love information. We love taking chaos and we love turning it into something nice and linear and orderly. We are attracted to this. And that is essentially what a narrative is. It is essentially what our life story is. Like I said, I'm a person who has always sort of stood a little bit apart from my own narrative, my own internal dialogue of who I am. That allows me then, first and foremost, that allows me to lucid dream, because even the dream story, it's another narrative that my brain is trying to spin, right? So I'm able to stand apart from it and go, I don't think this is actually, I don't believe any of this. I don't believe any of it.
Gotcha.
I'm a skeptic 100% to the last. And I would hope that anyone who is listening to me is 100%, not just going, oh, I just absolutely believe everything you're saying. I have no interest in that either.
Sure.
What I'm trying to do is explain the mechanics behind this and explaining how this relates to our relationship with all narratives, even our own, of who we are. And that's how I'm able to look at it. There's consciousness, whatever that is, and then there's every possible narrative, and you can define that however you want to, the narrative who you are. Really, it comes down to the context that's holding you in place right this very moment. Right now, everybody who's watching this show, everybody who's listening, you have some context that your internal dialogue is keeping you in a bubble, so to speak. I was doing this earlier, I was doing yada yada, and now I'm watching this show, and later I'm going to eat, and then I'm going to go to bed. And you have this streamlined sort of story, which is, I'm not saying it's fake. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that story. What I'm saying is what we can do is stand apart from that we don't have to buy into it 100%. We don't have to buy into any narrative 100%. We can look at any story and go, that's not the full truth. No matter how well it reflects reality, no story is ever going to reflect the whole truth. So I'm saying there's a way to stand back from everything. So that's where I started. I was able to stand back from the dream story, because that's what dreaming is, right? You never stop and go, none of this makes sense. This is insane.
And what you're saying, because I want to reiterate for people, because I this idea of the narrative and the self and stuff, there is some there's a lot of traditions in human cultures that do talk about this idea and talk about that relationship. I mean, the most popular thing I think in Western culture is probably the Buddhist idea, right? Because we're talking about in the relation to the self and stuff. And then people talk about with certain drug experiences, they talk about ego death and stuff. It's that's this idea of, you're kind of losing yourself and losing your sense of time. Like if you've ever been really messed up on something, you could your whole sense of time goes up. It feels something different. And I totally get, because we were talking about this a little bit before the show. When somebody tells me, oh yeah, I did DMT and I believe in the spirit world and stuff, okay, I get why you would totally feel that way, because you took a drug and that drug was messing with your brain. That's just my understanding of it. I'd be curious to see how you respond to that, because that's the only thing that makes sense to me is this is a physical process that's going on, and we're like a computer kind of malfunctioning a little bit.
Absolutely. And so I'll address that 100%. I feel that when it comes down to at the end of the day, I feel that, as you were saying, these are such subjective experiences, and that is what I'm always going to be trapped by, no matter what. I feel that even if I was able to put all of my time and attention into trying to prove some of these things to perhaps one or two people, what is that really going to do for me on the larger scale? I feel that, first of all, I think that if you are the type of person who's going to take this kind of crazy information and go, oh man, there's this thing where this guy was on this show and he actually knew what this guy was doing earlier, you're going to buy that? And there's always another story behind that could be maybe they were all in on it together. Maybe there's always. So my attitude is that. So
you don't think there's a systematic way we could analyze this though?
Yes, it has to be personal. You've got it. I have to. All I can do is hand each person the tools and go, here's the tools. You got to go see it and prove it to yourself. And that's the only thing that will ever be real for you. So now it's real for me. And so
Mm.
I'm like, my attitude is all I can do is try to keep handing everybody else. Here's what I've learned. This is the, these are the basic mechanics behind it. You go find out, you go find out your own conclusions. And ideally what I'm saying is, if you follow what I lay out for people in my books and in my videos and whatnot, if you keep following what I'm saying, you are eventually, I've already got people who are telling me, man, I'm just starting to lucid dream. I'm starting to pay attention to what my narrative is throughout the day. I'm starting to be able to question. And that's sort of, it kind of comes down to, you first have to start just stopping and going throughout the day going, what is real? Am I totally sure that I'm, not dreaming right now? What is
just
my
a brain in a
reality?
vat? We don't know.
Well, and there's
am I a philosopher dreaming I'm a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming I'm a philosopher?
And my philosophy really starts sounding very much like simulation theory on some level. I would say that I have no problem with simulation theory. When you lay out my complete philosophy and you look at simulation theory, I would say there's a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot of overlap with Zen Buddhism on some level. Like you were saying, there's a lot of Buddhist sort of philosophy, what I'm saying about the idea of dropping the self. But I'm still going to continue calling myself an atheist because I don't believe that any of this is supernatural. It's all natural. I believe everything I'm experiencing is within the realm of the natural laws. We just don't understand consciousness completely. Whatever it is, it's something that is non-localized. It's only localized because we tell ourselves it is.
Ooh, that's an interesting claim. But we got to get to some calls here because this is a call-in show. So let's go to that. But before we get to the calls here, we have to thank our patron of the week. Every single week, I give a shout out to the latest patron of the show, or just the patron. That's really cool. And this week's patron of the week is Ayame. I'm assuming it's Ayame. Ayame, probably Ayame. Thank you, Ayame, for donating to the show. And if you would like to donate to this particular program, all of the money goes directly towards making this show better. I don't receive a single cent of it. It's patreon.com/truthwanted. It helps get stuff like the equipment here and just everything that goes into making this show happen. That's what it goes to. So thank you guys for supporting the show. Supporting the show. I was going to say supporting the show, but that's not how you say words, Ian.
Okay.
But let's get to some calls